Welcome to the Cinema Club podcast. I am your host, Nick Leach, and today we're going to be diving into episode 8 of HBO's The Last of Us. We're almost to the end, just one more week to go. I can't believe it. I've been enjoying this time so much. If this is your first time to this podcast, the Cinema Club is like a book club, but for movies. Every episode, I invite one member of the Cinema Club to be my co-host for that week, who will choose the movie of the week and join me on the podcast to talk about that film or TV show. And before we get any further, to be completely clear, I want to give a big spoiler warning because we are going to be talking about anything and everything about this show and this penultimate episode. So if you haven't already, go ahead and go and watch those before you come back and enjoy the rest of the episode. So with that, enjoy.
You won't survive for long out there. There's room for you in our group if you want.
I don't mean to question your sense of mercy, David. She's just another mouth to feed.
If we leave her out here, she'll die.
Maybe that's God's will.
The others want to kill you? Let me protect you.
And as always, Chris and Paige are joining me on the podcast this week. So with that, let's get right into it. At the end of episode 7, Joel is not doing good at all. However, we start episode 8 by being introduced to a new group of people led by a man named David, who seems to be somewhat of a religious leader of the group. When we hear a girl crying, he stops reading from his Bible and goes over to her. David shows her compassion and she asks, "Where can we bury him?" And David says the ground is too cold and they can bury him in the spring. While he and another man named Jesse share a knowing look. After their meeting, David and James talk about their rations and go off together to hunt for more food. So just a note here, if you don't know already, if you have to have lived under a rock to not know this, but James is played by Troy Baker, who was the actor who voiced and played Joel in the video game. So I think it's really cool that not only are the writers and creators staying very true to the game and the storyline in the game, they're also doing just so much in the show to pay homage to also the people that were involved in the making of the game, including the motion capture actors in Troy Baker here. We saw Marlene earlier and Perry, and also here Troy Baker playing James. And then also, next week we're also going to see Ashley Johnson. So I just love the reverence they are paying to the game and also including everybody that was a part of the original making in the original game.
Yeah, I think it was really cool that we got to see, Troy Baker having a really nice sized role, in this episode. So that was really awesome to see. And he was playing a character that they really fleshed out here in the show, like definitely more of a side character, even more so in the game. So it's really cool to see, Troy Baker really just go with it and go all in on this character. And I think I was seeing some clip of him talking about, hey, he was really happy that he got to play an actual character, not just a clicker or something in this show, which I
saw that interview too. Yeah, that was
okay.
Great.
Yeah. I was like, oh, that's awesome. But yeah, this whole sequence I think is really great because it's giving a little bit more context about this group of people who, are holed up here and David's character as well, because in the game, we don't really get to see this side of the people, this collection of this group. And so it was really cool getting to see that. I did like, as someone who's already played the game, I liked that when they're all eating and David goes over to that girl and is like, oh, and she's like, oh, can we bury him? He's like, oh, it's too cold outside. I'm like, that's because you're going to eat that motherfucker later today. And they did.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I was actually going to ask you, Nick, the way they kind of set up this character, David, it's kind of like, oh, is he good? Is he bad? He's protecting his flock, as he puts it. Did you as you were watching this, like with virgin eyes on this character, did you think that David was a good or evil character? What were your thoughts here so far on him?
Well, I mean, they very clearly set him up as the antagonist of the episode. And so, I mean, just in just regular just story structure, there's no way David wouldn't be a quote, quote, bad guy / antagonist. He seems like a nice guy. And I think that they do such a good job in his insistence that he's a good guy to try to convince Ellie to join them. You can feel right from the get-go that it's not quite right. He's not quite right. Like, he's trying too hard to convince Ellie and us as the audience that he's a good guy. You know something's about to turn. So I mean, having never known who this guy was before, I think that this portrayal was just, the writing was such that you knew something was going on. You didn't have to really see him being bad from the get-go and I think it made the character even stronger to make it like that, because it's just such a nuanced performance. I love it. What I also love is in this just small little section to start off, we see a very different group than we've seen so far. I mean, Fedra is a very like militaristic dictatorship. Jackson is a thriving communist community. While this group is governed at this point, we think, by a theocracy, and very more specifically a patriarchal theocracy. I mean, David here is this preacher. He's using scripture to exert absolute power over this group.
You know, David's using religion in a way that, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people do. You know, David uses that as a tool for control over people. You know, and he's just not a good person.
Man, that's a foreign concept, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Brand new to me, but you know, he's not a good person. You know, he's a narcissist, cannibal, pedophile. I mean, pretty negative traits for somebody,
especially being the leader of this group. I mean, we don't know about the cannibal parts yet. We don't know about the pedophilia, but clearly this guy is drunk with power and using the scripture to those means.
Yeah, which, you know, in most shows that take place in some kind of apocalyptic setting, you typically do eventually find that group that's gone off the rails with, you know, revelation and whatever's going on. But I really liked how they handled it in this episode, because I think it was a little bit unique, just because of the, you know, how the clickers actually operate, how they survive, and how, you know, later on we get David's perspective of how that is love and how something that he views in his own unique way.
What I also find really interesting to compare these groups between Jackson and this group, where Jackson is thriving, these people are not. And that's partly due to them choosing a really rather unlucky place to call home. I mean, if there's an apocalypse, the first thing I would think is run to the mountains. But here in Colorado, in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, like unquestionably, it's a perfect place to be. There's nature, there's a lot of game running around. And especially in this place, like it's a resort property. It's the perfect location to like start a little community. They have everything right there. But once winter hits, everything is gone. Like, it's really a bad situation that they have themselves in.
No, I was definitely seeing those parallels, like you're mentioning, between those two communities. You know, one is thriving and, you know, has everything except bacon. And then we have this group who are, you know, eating people. But I think that also kind of talks to the leadership styles. You know, you have one leader who, I think she previously worked in government or law or something.
Prosecutor, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, her whole leadership style is very different. It doesn't involve a flock to protect. Whereas David, you know, he's a narcissist and maybe really coming into his true self now that the apocalypse has happened. And so, yeah, I just really enjoyed those parallels. Yeah.
And the parallels, too, between today and back then. I mean, the separation of church and state is something I absolutely agree with and believe in. And I mean, where we're headed right now with a lot of the things that are currently going on and the current legislation that's passing, it's a little concerning. And we see, I mean, I could not help but draw a couple parallels there.
hopefully we won't be, cannibalizing each other in the near future. But, we can see sometimes shit goes down when things aren't being run, maybe in certain ways. Leave it at that.
So we then cut to Joel and Ellie. Joel is nearly comatose, and Ellie is doing everything she can to take care of him and his wound, which has become infected. Ellie tells Joel she will be back and picks up Joel's rifle and heads off to the woods to hunt. She chases after a rabbit and then hears a rustle in the trees. She sees a deer off the distance, raises her rifle, and shoots.
I have been looking forward to this point in the show for a long time. In the game, this is the point in the game where we, as the player, get to finally play as Ellie for the first time. We've been playing as Joel throughout this whole story. So it's a pretty big, but also super fun change. And I know playing that for the first time, it was something that I was super psyched about. And so I've just been looking forward to this part of the game because of that. There is a scene in the game that I was hoping maybe they would put in here where, and they kind of alluded to it a little bit in the show, but in the game, she shoots this rabbit, and it's kind of like the first thing that you're doing as Ellie, basically. And I don't know if it's just me, maybe, but for me, it just is always like a little iconic part of the game. And then here, she's trying to go after that rabbit, and she lands on her face in the snow, which, maybe there are some people out there that are happy the rabbit survived, but it was just a part where I was like, oh, they kind of played homage to that. But yeah, I also like that, we get to see that whole process of Ellie with the rifle that's, very heavy, a little big for her, obviously, but she's able to take down that deer, and I think that, again, is cool because you got to see Ellie learn how to handle a rifle just a episode or two back, when Joel was teaching her with that target practice, and she was frustrated. So now she's like, hey, I got him.
Joel's not doing good. He's in and out of consciousness, and Ellie's doing everything she can to keep him alive, and she's failing. She's not doing a good job at it because, they're down to the last piece of jerky. And so what does she do? She thinks, what would Joel do in this situation? Up to this point, she's been learning from Joel and just absorbing everything that she can from Joel. And it's at this point that she finally can use what he taught her. And so she thinks, what would he do in this situation? So what he would do is he would get up, he would take the gun, he'd find them food and medicine. And so that's exactly what she does.
Yeah. And with that jerky you mentioned, like, it was just kind of reminded me of what would I do in that situation? It's kind of like the last slice of pizza, It's like, oh, hey, this is the last piece of food I have, and I'm starving to death. And you kind of see her make that decision to share it with Joel, which, again, she's making those decisions ongoing throughout the episode in the show, last couple episodes, to take care of Joel no matter what.
So the deer is hit, but is able to run off, and Ellie goes after it, following the trail of blood. Nearby, David and James have found the deer first and are standing over it when Ellie comes out from behind a tree and shouts at them to drop their rifles. Ellie holds them at gunpoint as David tries to negotiate with her over the deer meat. Ellie asks for some medicine, and David agrees, sending James off to go back and get some penicillin and a syringe. So what I thought is really interesting is it's very clear that this heavy gun, Ellie can't really hold it up. She's holding it wrong, not doing a good job at keeping it up. She's struggling, but she's also really in this moment trying her best to be scary. She lowers her voice and tries to keep the gun pointed at them. But what's really cool is that David sees right through that. But instead of capitalizing on it, he even tells James, no, it's not a trick. I'm not trying to give you code to go around and flank her or whatever. Just go and help her. He also sees in this moment that there's something that he connects with in her and really wants to explore her further. He doesn't just want to, because even at this point, he knows who she is.
Well, she's doing exactly what Joel would do at this point when she has an enemy in front of her.
Yeah, well, I liked this whole episode a lot. And I think it's largely because they followed what happens in the game basically to a T. Like they always do, they kind of expand things, cut a couple things here and there, change things. But even like the dialogue was like so much of it was like straight from the game. Like Ellie's saying ditto for Buddy Boy there when she's got the rifle on them. Go send Buddy Boy for the penicillin. I just really enjoyed that they chose to, stick with and include, all these little lines like that really, encapsulate and show Ellie is the same Ellie that we know, in the game here in the show.
Well, it was a intense part in the game for Ellie as well, especially when you said that it's like the first time we ever got to play her. So this is the first time. I mean, we got to see her by herself in other episodes, but this is the first time that she is like the main star of this episode. It's her time to shine. So,
and she's all alone. I mean, even like in the last episode, she wasn't with Joel or whatever. She was still kind of on her own. She still had Riley. She's never truly been alone, and in not just alone, but responsible for somebody too.
Yeah. And, I kind of talked about it a little bit at the very end of last week's episode discussion, but we get to see it in the last two episodes we've talked about here. But really, in this episode and in the episodes leading up in the show to this episode, this show becomes Ellie's. And this is the episode where that is more defined, at least in my mind. Because I was saying last week, like, Ellie shows that she doesn't need Joel, or I should say, Ellie shows the audience, us, that this is becoming her show and that she's actually the main character. Because so far along, we've been following Joel primarily, and now very recently in the last episode and this episode, we're getting to see Ellie take the main stage and shoulder the weight of this show. And as we'll discuss later on here, like, Bella Ramsey does a amazing job.
Just like as in the game.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Also, little interesting thing here. Did y'all know that penicillin is actually a fungus?
No, I did not. That's interesting. Okay.
So that's funny, interesting little
bit. Yeah.
This is just nothing to do with Last of Us right now, but have you noticed that every apocalypse show or movie, penicillin is like the only thing that ever exists still? Go get me penicillin. Why is penicillin? Go get it.
Well, because penicillin, of any drug, I would say penicillin in the history of medication and pharmacology is like the turning point of all turning points for the medical industry and the treatments that they were able to provide to patients. It was a game changer when it came out, and like, because before that, you couldn't really treat an infection. It was mainly just like bloodletting, just let the pus out, maybe wash it out, and see what happens, and hope and pray. But penicillin like was the game changer, and also relatively easy to make and manufacture. So it makes sense that in an apocalypse, that's, I mean, the first thing, and one of the most, especially for infection, one of the most of all, even to this day, one of the most effective ways to treat an infection. So. No, that absolutely is relevant.
That was a much better answer. I was going to say Big Pharma. So good job, Nick.
I was just going to say all the good stuff's been used.
No, but it is like even like a visually like a cool thing. Like, oh, hey, cool. We got little glass bottles, poke the needle in. Like, it's a very like good visual representation of, okay, I'm going to fix this person right now.
Yeah.
But also it shows just where she's at now too. She's still a kid. She doesn't know how to use penicillin. She doesn't know the dosage that he needs. She just hopes and prays that what she gave him was enough, and hopefully it doesn't kill him. I mean, it wouldn't, but
I was having the same thought process. Like, how does she know how much to give him? Like, because I was like, shit, if that was me, I don't know what to do.
Oh, she gave him way too much. Like, it was very clear from what she gave him at first and what she like pulled out of that. It was way too much.
Okay, good to know.
I was cringing so hard stabbed him right in that spot. Oh, I thought you were supposed to give it to it in your butt.
I think you are.
He doesn't know.
She doesn't know. I mean, I would have done the same thing.
But I was like, I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes for the apocalypse. All right. Huge syringe full of penicillin right in the wound. Perfect.
So as they wait for James, David convinces Ellie to find shelter. Ellie agrees and they sit by a fire that David has made. David tries to convince Ellie to join their group and shares that he is a preacher and that everything happens for a reason. He reveals that there had been a member of their group who had been killed in a scavenging run and had left a daughter without a father. Ellie realizes that the man David is talking about is the one Joel had killed before being stabbed, but it's too late. She's about to leave when James arrives back holding a gun towards Ellie. David tells James to let Ellie go with the medicine and once more tells Ellie he can protect her. Ellie leaves and goes back to Joel, injecting medicine into his wound. So this is the first time that we have seen somebody pull anything over Ellie. I mean, when David reveals that he knew it was her and Joel who killed Alec, Ellie was just a couple seconds late to that party. I mean, nobody's been able to fool Ellie. She's always been ahead of everyone else. But David sucked her into his story and was able to pull one on over her.
He did it so smoothly too. So it would have gotten me.
Yeah, and this is interesting to me because just to compare and contrast a little bit. In the game, basically, as they're in that area around the fire, from my recollection, there's this horde that starts attacking them. And so they have to come together and like Dave whips out a pistol. He was hiding the whole time. And he and Ellie have to come together to fight off the clickers, like, 24 of them or something crazy. But you kind of in that moment are like, oh, well, maybe this David character isn't all bad because Ellie just experienced that, or you experienced that as a person playing Ellie with David. And so I thought it was interesting that they chose not to go that route, but I think it still worked really great. It just was a different way of showcasing David and how he was manipulating Ellie a little bit here. David is talking about how he subscribes to the viewpoints of things being meant to be or not meant to be here a little bit. And Ellie is kind of scoffing at that a bit. We get to see play out a little bit more later in the episode, but it was funny for me watching this because I previously, when I was younger, used to subscribe to that same process. I shouldn't say same, but similar process to what David is talking about, where he's talking about things that are meant to be or not meant to be in the universe, or God's will, or what have you. But as I've gotten older, I have now subscribed to the viewpoint that Ellie has. So it's interesting, for at least for me personally, sitting down and watching these two characters discussing this a little bit here, and then as it plays out later in the show, because it's something that even in the last few years, it's been something that it's been a large viewpoint change for me. Because honestly, if you're thinking, oh, things are meant to be or not meant to be, that's very different than thinking, oh, everything that's happening, I either am controlling or dictating, or I can try and dictate and control. Very different, obviously, very different viewpoints to subscribe to. And I think we get to kind of have some fun with that in this episode.
I mean, are you going to be a sheep? Or are you going to be a wolf? And we see that David has found a flock of sheep. And I mean, that's very reminiscent of, a lot of our us who grew up in the faith had very similar experiences with people like that, who just blindly follow what everybody teach you rather than actually questioning everything. And I think whether you believe or don't believe, I think questioning is super important for just belief in general, not just having your head above the clouds and saying things just happen because they happen. We don't really have control over anything, and things will just fall into place because of a higher power or a higher whatever.
And I don't mean to be categorizing or throwing a blanket on one viewpoint in life either. That's not my intention, because I mean, plenty of people have the viewpoint that, oh, things happen for a reason or don't happen for a reason, without any religious connection to that, obviously. But I think it is very interesting that in David's case, that is the mindset that he has subscribed to.
Exactly.
And that he's almost pushing on Ellie.
And I would say maybe I would even question whether or not he actually believes that or not, or if he just uses that to control everybody. I mean,
right. It's like, oh, things happen for a reason, so we're supposed to eat your dad for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's the extreme version, obviously. But it just was really interesting just for me individually. And I just kind of wanted to share that a little bit with you guys.
So back at David's group, dinner is being prepared, and the cook asks a fellow cook what the meat is, and he replies that it is venison. They combine it into one pot of soup, and dinner is served. David and James return with the deer, and instead of being greeted with praise, the mood is somber. David realizes that James has told the group about Ellie, and David admits to the group that they have found the girl who was with the man who killed one of their own. The man's daughter tells David that they should kill both the man and the girl. David hits the girl, knocking her off her chair, and tells her that she will always have a father, and demands her respect. He stands up and leads the group in prayer before they start to eat.
Can I just say, that was a lot, but when when they're bringing out that meat and they're throwing it in there,
and then David and James walk in with the deer.
Yeah, I was like, that's definitely Daddy-O right there, getting chopped up. But for some reason, like this happens to me, but I'll like think of something from a different movie or TV show sometimes when I'm watching something. And for some reason, the line in Lord of the Rings, when one of the orcs gets killed and they have Merry and Pippin tied up, and one of them's like, looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. Like, that was like what was in my head as he's bringing out this chopped up guy to throw in this tomato soup.
It was a good way to film it, because we were all thinking that it was the deer until the deer was brought in, and we're like,
they're all like just chowing down, like, oh my god, this is so good, so hungry.
And if you don't know, you're still like, what the hell is going on?
You could tell that James was so not wanting to eat it, but he was hungry.
David's like, yeah, let me get my 4 times as much anybody else's plate right here, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm like, okay, so being a leader comes with some benefits. It's not, again, it's very different than some other leadership styles that we saw previously, where it was more of a communism, we share everything equally kind of setup. It was like, oh, I am, as David says, the father figure leading my flock. And so that comes with perks.
If I ever joined a group and they call each other the flock, you bet your ass I would just turn around and walk away. I mean, like, I'd rather be alone at this point.
Yeah, and we see here finally, too, the change in David. David reveals himself more to us, the audience, in this sequence. To this point, he's been trying to just play the good guy and convince people that he's the good guy. But here's that switch when he goes over to that girl and just slaps her across the face. And then, not just that, but then he tells her mom to sit back down. Like, textbook version of an abuser. I mean, he not only physically assaults the girl, he next motions her mother to just sit back in her place. And then he reaches a hand out to this girl as if he's like trying to help her. And it's her fault that he had to hit her. And she is the reason she's on the floor. Textbook gaslighting right there.
And then he wants her to call him daddy. So
yeah, I mean, that's what happens in the patriarchy. The father provides for you. The father protects you, the father teaches you, the father scolds you, and the father punishes you, but out of love.
Yeah, and I think this is another, now we're talking about parallels a lot in this episode, but comparing and contrasting, I use that phrasing instead here, with Joel and the fatherly figure that he is, we can see that obviously a lot of differences are in place here with David and Joel and what they think makes a fatherly figure, or a good fatherly figure.
So the next morning, Ellie continues to help Joel, checking his wound, and is pleased to see the wound is healing. She goes outside to feed their horse and is startled by birds flying up a couple streets over. Ellie hides and sees a group of David's men searching for them. David argues with his men, insisting that they bring Ellie back with them instead of killing her. Ellie runs back to the house and down to Joel. She puts a knife in his hand and tells him to kill anyone who comes downstairs. She leaves and barricades the room behind her before hopping on her horse. She takes off, finds the group, and shoots at them, but James shoots her off her horse, throwing her to the ground and knocking her out. James stands over her and is about to shoot her when David shoots his gun into the air. James knows he has gone too far. David picks up Ellie and tells the rest of the group to search the houses.
I was really looking forward to this sequence when Ellie gets on the horse. So I knew it was going to happen sometime in this episode. Because I don't know. Again, it's kind of like an iconic thing that I remember from the game, like basically getting on that horse and riding through that town, everyone's shooting at you. And then, the horse gets shot and she goes flying. And I really liked that they stuck with that here in the show. Because again, I just thought that was such a cool sequence from the game. So I'm really glad that they decided to keep that.
You know that she's trying as much as she can to protect Joel, even though she has no idea what she's doing. But the fact that she was doing it out of love and care was great.
Yeah, she's like, if anybody comes down here, kill that mofo. Like, and that's like ingrained. That's the last thing she tells him, which I thought they did a nice job of, like, they show him like having some consciousness. And he's like, barely in it.
But he, at this point, there's no way that he can defend himself at this point, we think. Like, there's no way he's getting up.
Something else I liked was that James is walking with David into the town, and they're talking about, David's like, hey, keep the girl alive. I want her alive. And, he's getting some pushback on that. And basically, I don't know if this is what James actually subscribes to or not, but he's like, oh, maybe it's God's will that she dies. Interesting. I'm just going to leave that right there. But it just is like, hey, like, again, it's utilizing or subscribing to a viewpoint where it's like, hey, like, if improperly used, of course, like anything else, you can twist and make something into whatever you want it to be.
Well, I would argue that in this story, James is probably the smartest out of everybody, because this is somebody who very clearly has already killed one of the members of their group. This is somebody who is dangerous, she doesn't trust them. She has shown no sign that she is trustworthy. And so, like, some normal skepticism is just normal here. And the fact that David just is like, he trusts her immediately and has no problem with her and wants to save her, it very clearly shows that David does not see James as an equal. Even though James is probably the closest person to David at this point, they are in no way equal here. And whereas Ellie is more like of an equal to David here, and ends up being both of their demise.
And like you said, like, James is kind of going along with things. He probably knows about all the people hung up in the freezer, getting chopped up and everything. But, in front of the rest of the group, he's like, oh, well, maybe it is God's will that this girl doesn't come back with us. So I appreciate that he's kind of playing into David's leadership style or the way he's showcasing what should or should not happen with the group. So again, this show, like, the details are super interesting. And I find them, like, to really add a lot of character depth to characters, like side characters that we normally wouldn't, or at least in the game, and a lot of times in TV, wouldn't have the opportunity to see.
I think that's where HBO is more on the upper end of, like, shows, is because they do that all the time. Game of Thrones and House of Dragons, you get the, like, little side characters that you still get to have a development.
Yeah, I mean, even Bella Ramsey's character in Game of Thrones, like, she's maybe on screen a total of 15 minutes. And like, she's still a very memorable character from that show, at least for me personally, because of the way they wrote her and how she acted her butt off, in that show. Same thing with Pedro's character, he's more established, but he's a side character and still one of the coolest characters in Game of Thrones. That's saying a lot because there's a ton of them.
I guess that's where you gotta find all your actors and actresses off of Game of Thrones to succeed.
Which HBO is doing a great job. Like they're just bringing people that nobody knows about apparently and making them stars, which I think is awesome. And I think the way in which they ended this episode, if they want to, I think they could complete the series and end it the same way the show, the first game ends. What I'm really hoping they do not do is ended it on a cliffhanger.
They need to end it like the game.
Yeah, I hate shows that you're working towards this goal the whole season and then you get a cliffhanger that has no resolution whatsoever. Like I watched that show 1923 that you recommended, the Yellowstone spinoff. Hated the ending, absolutely hated it because there's no resolution on any kind of level, and I was just pissed off with it. Like it doesn't even want me to come back for season 2. But I was thinking about that in relation to The Last of Us because I'm really hoping they don't go that route. I'm really hoping that they do end it, like you were saying, Paige, the same way that they wrap up their first game, because I think that really would not only honor like the fan base, but also the first time viewers as well. So I think they can do it. I think they can do it if they wanted to, which I'm hoping they did.
They already made it this far.
Exactly.
I mean, what's the point of ending it in a cliffhanger when you only have one major part left?
And they didn't know if season 2 is going to be greenlit, I think for that reason that they are going to end it the same way they ended the first game, with resolution on a lot of points. At least that's me trying to be positive about it. I don't know.
And I mean, Craig Mazin really is a master at the limited series. I mean, the way that he ended Chernobyl is just such a perfect ending to that story. So I have no doubt he's going to be able to do such an amazing bookend to this just chapter. We're glad that there's a season 2 already. I mean, there's a game 2, so we're glad that there's a season 2. So if they're doing what they're doing with this season in the next season, I have no doubt that it's going to be an amazing ending, even if it is a little shorter than we all wish it was.
But to kind of answer your question, I think they can have a really good last episode. And I think it is something that HBO needs. Honestly, they do a really nice job of not dragging out shows unnecessarily. Like they, hey, this is a story we have. We're going to shoot it and be done with it. It doesn't usually matter too much, whatever it is. So I think their whole approach to this was, let's make a good season television. And if we get renewed for a second season, we'll do game 2 is what I'm hoping was their thought process, which just because of who's involved, I think is what happened, but we'll have to see till next week.
We digress. One of the men enters the house Joel is staying in, and Joel wakes up to the footsteps above. The man walks down the stairs and finds Joel's bed empty. Joel jumps out and stabs the man in the neck. We cut back to Ellie waking up to find herself locked in a cage in the kitchen. David tells Ellie that the others want to kill her, but he can protect her. David's men continue to search for Joel, and one of them finds another man knocked out in the snow. When the man goes to investigate, Joel comes from behind and knocks him out. Inside the house again, Joel brutally interrogates one of the men, and when he gets the info he needs, Ellie being kept in a secret resort in a abandoned resort called Silver Lake, Joel stabs him and picks up a pipe and beats the other man to death.
They followed the interrogation scene well from the game. I know that was an intense part in the game. It was an intense part in the show.
Yeah, that was like shot for shot, scene from scene, dialogue from dialogue, right from the game. And like seeing that like in live action, like it was kind of intense. Like Joel's about to pop this guy's kneecap off, But I liked that, again, a similar tactic to what we did with the couple in the cabin. He's like, hey, point on the map to where it's at and where we are, again, we're kind of seeing the unguarded Joel. We've seen a guarded Joel up to this point where he's, trying to be gruff with Ellie, but we really see him take ownership. Like, I'm going to take care of Ellie and do whatever I need to do in order to accomplish that goal.
It shows or alludes and hints to the past that he and Tommy and Tess, what they did in that time period between when we left them in the middle part, between the 30 years between the beginning of the outbreak and when we pick up back at the QZ in episode 1. But also it shows that Joel, I mean, this is just a part of what he's capable of. Joel, I mean, at this point, Joel's 10% is better than two burly men at 100%. I mean, Joel not only fights super efficiently, and I mean, that alludes to his military training, but he also is fighting for Ellie. Like, he doesn't know where she is, but he knows that she's in danger and he's not there to save her. And so if this is what he is capable of at 10%, there's nothing he is not capable of.
Yeah, I think, he's got the adrenaline going. He's a man on a mission. Same thing in the game, but I just love, when after he kills that first guy, the second guy's like, basically begging for his life. And Joel says something along the lines of like, oh, I believe the first guy. I don't need you. And then just
he's already got the information he needed.
Takes him out. Yeah, I was like, damn, badass. And I think like it's funny. Don't include this part, but I think it's funny because when Sarah and I are watching the show, I call him Papi Pedro. So Sarah and I have fun with that. But I'm like, oh, Papi Pedro, he's going hard on these motherfuckers right now. That's hot.
So back with Ellie, she attempts to escape her cage to no avail. As she's trying to find the weak point, she notices something under the butcher station that terrifies her. David comes in with some food and looks to see what troubles Ellie, a human ear left behind on the floor. David's secret is out, and he tells her that the food he has brought her is just deer meat. Ellie asks if she's going to chop her up, but David says he won't. Ellie's disgusted at him, but David says when he looks at her, he sees himself, and that he knows if he let her go, she would just stab him in a second because she has a violent heart too. He says that his new worldview is thanks to the cordyceps, saying that it isn't evil, it is fruitful, it multiplies, it feeds and protects its children, and protects its future with violence if it must, and it loves. Ellie baits David closer to the cage, even placing a hand on top of his before wrenching his fingers back, breaking one of them, and he grabs for his keys. He slams her against the bars, and he scrambles to the exit. Ellie yells at him, "Ellie, tell them Ellie is the little girl who broke your fucking finger."
This whole scene and sequence was straight from the game as well, which was super fun. I felt like this was a lot more intense than the game for sure, because Bella's acting is just phenomenal. That's all I have to say. I mean, it was a really good part. It shows her will to live. She's strong. She's independent. She knows how to try to get these keys. I wouldn't have thought of breaking his fingers if I was trapped in there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love this whole sequence. So well done. And like you were saying, Nick, like this whole time David's trying to get her name for her to tell her who she is. And after the fact, after she's hurt him physically, Ellie, at that line, like, Ellie, tell them Ellie is the little girl who broke her fucking finger. Like, well, Ramsey like knocked it out of the park, this whole sequence, but that is like the icing on top of the cake right there. Yeah. We also get to see a little bit more of David and the sick, twisted shepherd that he is in this sequence. We kind of start to get those, or see more, I should say, more of those pedo intentions, I think, a little bit here, where he's like putting the hand on the cage and everything. And yeah, it's this weird thing that I don't fully know what he was exactly wanting, but he wanted a minion, he wanted a partner, he wanted maybe some kind of wife out of this. Just really like well done acting on that level, though. It was just it like captured me. Yeah. Oh yeah. I was like glued in. Didn't take very many notes on this area because I was just like glued in the whole time, but it's really well done.
No, 100% David is so creepy. Like David's interest in Ellie is not merely paternal. He wants to have her, he wants to possess her, he wants to own her. And he looks at this girl who is so vastly different from anyone else in his group. I mean, his group is just sheep and he is the wolf. And because he sees that in her, he's intensely attracted to someone who has the same amount of confidence that he has. I mean, his confidence goes to narcissism, but he sees this confidence in her, someone who has just as much inner brutality as himself. I mean, he's broken all of his flock, he's broken them. And here she is, she's a wolf in front of him like he is. So first, we have David saying in this episode that, I mean, it kind of seems like he wants to have her as his daughter, but that does change, like you said, Chris, to him starting to actually, we see that really he does want her as his child wife. But the good thing is that Ellie isn't like him. David said that Ellie has a violent heart, and while Ellie is certainly capable of doing horrific things to people, and she may have somewhat of a violent heart, she also has a beautiful heart, a caring, compassionate, loyal heart, where David is a narcissist, Ellie is flowing with empathy. And so Ellie has both kinds of love, this violent and protective love that we've been talking about, this animalistic love, but she also has the compassionate and caring side as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice breakdown of that, Nick, honestly. Because yeah, like Ellie's love is both dark and beautiful. And I think what I've experienced, at least in the second game, this is spoiler free, but I really think that what you just shared holds so true throughout the whole narrative of the second game. And hopefully, our second or third season of the show, we'll get to see that play out, that fierce, dark and beautiful love that Ellie has within her.
And I think that's kind of the point of this episode, is that this episode is a bit of a turning point for Ellie, because it's after this that she can see that difference in her. She can finally see the separation of her violent side versus her caring side, which is something that may have been more married in past episodes in the season so far, been more married together. But this, she finally sees in David what that true violent love is and what that is capable of.
Yeah, like a dark, twisted love. I mean, I guess that is something you could label that as, as you kind of went in detail about. It's definitely his own thing he's got going on, but it is a version of that. Yeah.
And what I enjoy about this, even though, I mean, who can enjoy pedophilia, but we're seeing in this series literally all aspects of love, and where pedophilia may be absolutely abhorrent, it's still a version of love that we have to deal with. And like the creators said from the beginning, love isn't always a good thing. Pedophilia and abuse, I should say, too.
Yeah, because again, it's what I'm appreciating about the writing in this show is that it's showcasing David in a manner in which we get a glimpse of the inner working of his mind. And so even though, like you said, Nick, it's not something that, we relate to or look upon at all as something positive, obviously, it's something where we again see the twisted, sick mind of somebody and their viewpoint on the subject.
And I have to say, I finally, in this moment, have confirmation here from what I said in episode 2 about how Cordyceps loves. David says that Cordyceps is what set him free, its ability to be fruitful and multiply and protect itself at all costs, even violence. And that, to David, defines what love is.
Yeah, because like David says, this like possessing and multiplying, and that's how he views that as a avenue of love.
And I mean, that's also textbook definition again of abuse. Abuse is so one-sided. It's a one-sided kind of love. It doesn't allow for the receivee of that love to give love back.
Yeah, great point.
So unfortunately, we did have to lose Paige here. She had to leave early, but Chris and I are going to keep going for this episode. Back to Joel, we see him searching Silver Lake Resort for Ellie, tracking a blood trail in the snow into a garage where he finds their horse, as well as a couple of butchered bodies hanging from the rafters on meat hooks. We cut back to Ellie as David and James takes Ellie out of her cage and place her on the butcher block table. She screams and fights them and even bites David in the process. As David raises the cleaver above his head, Ellie proclaims that she is infected. This stops David, and he and James debate with each other, not believing that she's infected if she still hasn't turned. This lapse allows Ellie to grab the cleaver and plant it straight into James's neck. He falls back and slumps against the wall, and Ellie makes her escape.
Yeah, I really liked when we get to see Joel kind of making his way into the town, and he kind of comes into that one building where they have, the people strung up on meat hooks. And I appreciated that it wasn't something where I was like, pan to Joel, all shocked and surprised. It's like, okay, yeah, that tracks. Anyway, on with on with the mission I go.
I mean, he's just solely focused on getting Ellie, that it doesn't matter what this group is. He already knows this group is bad because they've taken Ellie. Doesn't matter. They are just evil, and he doesn't care what is in his way. Nothing's going to phase him until he gets to Ellie. And it's this trope that of the hero on his way to save the person in distress here. It's just building that tension to be released at the end of this episode. And then what I love here about Ellie on the table and her finally proclaiming that she's infected, it's such a smart move on her part, because up to this point, every single person that she's revealed the secret to has said, never tell anybody that you're infected. That's like the last thing anybody should hear from you, because they're just gonna want to kill you. But it's that secret, her secret, that actually keeps her alive here.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of in The Hobbit when the trolls, capture Bilbo and his friends, the dwarves, and Bilbo's like, "Oh no, don't eat that one. He's full of worms." He's playing for time, and I feel like Ellie was doing a little bit of that herself here, and it works. I really liked how she took out James there. I mean, that was straight from the game as well, but just like taking that meat cleaver straight to the neck, like that was dope. I like that.
Troy Baker gets a nice on-screen death to go.
Yeah, good send off.
So Ellie runs out of the kitchen and into the main dining room with David hot on her tail, knife in hand. David continues to look for Ellie, taunting her with no way out. She finds a log from the fireplace and throws it at David, setting the curtains ablaze. David complains to Ellie that he's a good man and that he could have made Ellie's life better if she only had let him. He tells her he changed his mind. Ellie needs a father, and he's going to keep her and teach her. But Ellie has found a knife, and she lunges at him, stabbing him in the side. He pounces on top of her and pins her down, saying that he likes the fighting the most, and with a sadistic look on his face, he reaches down. Eesh. Ellie reaches up and gets her fingers on the cleaver and stabs him. He lunges back, and she gets on top of him, hacking away over and over and over again as she screams, the building burning around them. Ellie stumbles out of the steakhouse, and Joel is standing there. She falls into Joel's arms, and Joel calms her down. Ellie realizes it's Joel and collapses into his arms as he said, "It's okay, baby girl." Something he has not said since Sarah. Joel gives her his jacket, and the two walk away together, away from Silver Lake.
Whoa. That's a lot to unpack there.
What an ending. to this episode. And I mean, what I love the most about this is there's a very intentional choice that the writers made this episode. I mean, we have this trope that you have this hero whose sole focus is to save the helpless person that they love, and in the end they will swoop in at the last moment to save them. And so this entire episode, we've been seeing Joel. He's down and out on his last few breaths, and then he gets up and he gets the adrenaline to get himself up, and now he's on this mission to come after her to save this girl who he now loves as his daughter. But Joel is not the one to save Ellie. Ellie saves herself.
Yeah, I'm really glad they didn't have Joel come charging into town, taking people out with "I need a hero, I'm holding on to a hero" playing in the background. Because this is about Ellie. As you were saying, Nick, we as an audience and Ellie needed to see this. And, when she kills David, it's clear that, he's beyond dead. And she kind of slows down there and then goes right back at it again, like hacking him. And that scene is upsetting because we're seeing her trauma there. There's like blood on the lens and everything.
And it's in that moment where she pauses that you look, and Bella does such an amazing job. Like, this is such an amazing performance because you see something click in her eyes, and it's like something has broken inside of her. And it's at this point that David really has broken her.
Yeah. And I think that this moment is really pivotal to Ellie and the future Ellie that we see in her story, because what we saw in Ellie here does become very important and impactful for Ellie's future. And I really, again, loved how they handled this whole event, and I was thinking when I was watching this in the game, when Ellie's going up against David, I died in that game so many times trying to finally kill David. So this was like ingrained in my brain after trying to, get past this level, so to speak, in the game. So I was like, finally, cool, we're here. I didn't have to, mess around with this for 45 minutes. But no, I really enjoyed how they went about this. Cinematography was awesome with like the fire behind her and the rafters and everything. And yeah, like when Joel saves Ellie emotionally at the end of this episode, after she has physically saved herself and says, "Baby girl," like you said, what she used to call Sarah, my wife, got emotional during that part, because that is like what I think, as you were kind of saying, Nick, all along throughout this series, Joel's the one who always goes, and he is a protector. He's the savior. But in this scenario, in this episode, Joel is the one who is there to emotionally save Ellie, not physically. And I think that's really important there, because she would have, who knows what would have happened after this if Joel wasn't there.
And that is something that is so not Joel, because to this point, like this entire series up to this point, Joel has been the one who's been super reserved, doesn't let anything out, doesn't want to let anybody see him as weak, doesn't want to deal with his emotions. But yeah, like you say, it's then Joel who comes in, and he's the one who saves her emotionally. And at this point, she is, like I said, she's gone. She's broken. And she's almost lost her entire mental sanity. And though she may, as you've said, after this point, have a lot of mental scars going forward from this moment that may affect her the rest of her life, her Joel is there to save her.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think this was a perfect ending to the sequence, just kind of, having them walk off there. I know, I was texting you and Paige a little bit this week. I'm like, oh man, like got 2 episodes left. Runtime isn't super long for these last 2. This episode did really, showcase to me though that, again, writing in the show is so good. Not only did they had like a whole arc here where they introduced the villain, they had the villain, die, like that like so much happens in this episode, but it's all, wrapped up a little bow on top, and it's perfect. And so it has been giving me some hope that we won't get a huge cliffhanger in the next episode, that they'll, conclude the story pretty well there from the game. But I'm excited for episode 9 of The Last of Us, because we're finally going to have, maybe the explanation of Ellie's origin a little bit here. They don't really explain this in the game, to my recollection, but maybe we'll get to see why she is immune to the fungus. We'll get to see Ashley Johnson as Ellie's mother, which I'm personally really hyped for. I know Paige has been talking about that, where we've been kind of guessing, when is it going to actually happen? So it's cool. It's going to be in the finale now, because, Ashley Johnson really gave life to Ellie in the game. And so it's really cool that they're incorporating her in this series, and she's going to be giving birth to her own Ellie, But yeah, man, I'm just really, it's going to be bittersweet, watching that last episode on Sunday for me.
I am so hyped for this last episode. I mean, it's going to finally finish this first chapter, I hope, of this story, the first bit. I mean, I'm glad to know that there's a season 2 coming, but
me too.
This has been one of the most amazing watches of a show I've ever had, and such a surprise for me as somebody who did not play the games, to come into this with fresh eyes and to just be immersed in this world that I had not ever been introduced to before. A different take on the apocalypse, a different take on a lot of the tropes that are used, and a lot of the themes, I should say, a lot of the themes that are used throughout this show and this season. I mean, it's been near perfect of a season, and I can't say that for a lot of shows. I mean, I am a diehard Game of Thrones fan, and I will say that this, comparatively to, even say, I mean, I've said it before, this comparatively to House of the Dragon, there is no comparison. But this, compared to Game of Thrones, it's close for me. And I thought I would never be able to say that anything would rival Game of Thrones in my book, but this is it. And so I'm really sad. It's bittersweet. We're getting to the end of this, and I've had such an amazing time talking about this with you and Paige, and sharing our insights with our audience. And so with that, I think we've reached the end of our episode. And so if you want to just leave us with where we can find you, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to mention real quick some of the metrics for this episode, because I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. I didn't see, like, compared to like episode 7, but I was seeing that The Last of Us episode 8, When We Are in Need, reached 8.1 million viewers on its premiere night.
Jesus.
It's a lot of people. So that's like a whopping 74% increase from the series debut, which is kind of crazy. But it's really starting to feel like everyone is watching this show. I mean, I went out for breakfast this weekend, and I was wearing a hoodie with the Fireflies emblem on it. And my server was like, "Oh, is that a Last of Us hoodie?" I mean, like, I've never gotten that, before. So I think that was like super cool to really see that this is something that has just blown up. And as a fan of the games, it makes me so happy that, hopefully more people are going to be jumping into the games, but also that this show has been not only successful, but, like, for me, really, really well done. And so, yeah, I'm just hoping that they can keep on sprinkling that magic wherever they're getting that, and carry us through here to the end of this season.
I mean, I keep saying it, that I compare it to Game of Thrones. I mean, Game of Thrones, when that was coming out, we were having a very similar thing. It was such a piece of the zeitgeist that people were talking about it just on the streets. Everybody was talking about it from week to week. Oh my word, I can't believe that just happened. And that's this show. It's what's happening. But whereas Game of Thrones, it went kind of downhill the last couple seasons, especially the last season, this show, it has been consistently episode to episode, just 100%. I can't find a lot of fault with any episode in this series. And I can't say that about Game of Thrones. There are episodes in Game of Thrones that are filler episodes. There are episodes that's like, where were they going here? I wish they would have done something else here. I wish they would have shown somebody else's story. And I can't say that about this show. It's perfect. It's about as perfect as a show can be.
Oh, absolutely. And that's how everybody kind of, from my understanding, has felt about the first game. What is interesting, which I'm interested to kind of see what happens with the actual television show, is that the second game is incredibly polarizing among Last of Us fans. And so due to that, I personally love it, but because of that fact, I'm really interested to see what they end up doing with the story and what changes they might put into the television show. I'm also thinking, the second game, the story is pretty large. So I think they could definitely, if they wanted to, make a season 2 and 3 with that second game, which I'm kind of hoping they do. But there's so much to look forward to, next week and in the future.
Or a third game I've been hearing rumors about.
Yes, I've been trying to look out for that for sure. I'm really hoping they are, but there hasn't been any official, announcement of, we're writing it, or, it's in development on some stage. But I'm hoping, if with the success of this, that maybe they will consider making a third installment of the game to wrap up Ellie's story. We'll have to see, I guess. But yeah, I'm super excited for Sunday night. I'll definitely be there as soon as that pops up on HBO Max. If you want to connect with me, definitely feel free to jump on Instagram at christophers.snap.shots, or just look me up on Facebook at Christopher Amick. If you're part of the Cinema Club Facebook group, you'll definitely see me in there. But yeah, let's connect and let's try and get you on the show here. It'd be awesome.
Absolutely. And Paige can't be here, but you can find her on Instagram at RacerXGirl. I love her handle. And join the Cinema Club Facebook group at facebook.com/group/the Cinema Club TCC, and listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Anchor, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It will really help us to reach more listeners and invite even more members to our club. Message me on Facebook if you would like to be a part of the podcast. And finally, if you haven't already heard, we just launched a new support option on our channel. So if you are loving the show and feeling a little bit generous, please check that out and consider supporting our show so we can continue our... You can check that out at anchor.fm/the Cinema Club. We have some big plans going forward to be more consistent, and we'll be releasing that plan to you a little bit more in detail next week on our last episode of this very special series going through The Last of Us. So stay tuned. We will keep you posted with updates soon, but in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week. We will see you next week on the next one.